Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today, both in person and on Zoom. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Catherine Zimmerman, and I'm a librarian here at Twain Library, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our ongoing series about dementia. For those joining via Zoom, please don't hesitate to participate by submitting your questions in the Q&A feature. Also, the mics that we use are very sensitive, and keep that in mind if you have any side conversations, they will probably be picked up. And we will be recording today's program, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in about a week. So as we know, a lot of caregivers can't always attend because of how busy they are, and so they will be able to watch this at a later time. Today we're going to start with a presentation from Liz, who's with the Connecticut Alzheimer's Association, and she will be talking about communicating effectively with people who have dementia. And then that will be followed by a presentation by our special guest, Laurette Klier, who is a founder of Nana's Books, and she will share her insights on caregiving for people with dementia and using art and literature as a form of fostering connection. Before we dive in, I just also want to highlight our new memory care collection that we have downstairs in the library, which has reading material both for people with dementia and for caregivers. And it also has the memory care kits, which can be used to engage with your loved one with dementia. So we're truly delighted to have you all here today. And with that, let's welcome our first speaker, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to the library for hosting and to Elaine and Catherine for all of their help in setting it up. I'm happy to be here today. As Catherine said, my name is Liz, and I am a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association. I'm a community educator, and I got involved about 2 years ago, and my connection to the disease was my dad. So my dad passed away in 2021 after living with the disease for about 5 years. And for the first probably 4 years, it was okay. It wasn't terrible. He was just very repetitive, asking the same questions. The biggest joke we have is I had a cat, and when he was staying with us at the end, he would, every time that cat would come in the room, he would say, "Oh, you have a cat? What's the cat's name? How old was the cat when you got him?" So it became like this running joke. But it was interesting because their mind goes to the same place every single time. So my parents had retired down to Florida, and then we started noticing different things that kind of were, alarming, to thinking that maybe there was something wrong. And then right before COVID hit, we decided that it was probably time to move them back up to the Northeast, because it was just getting to be a little too much for my mom to take care of him on her own. So we moved them back, and then COVID hit. So they stayed with me for a while because we had trouble finding a place for them to live during all of that. And then we got them settled in their own little place, and he was kind of chugging along again, just kind of short-term memory issues. And then he fell, and he went to the hospital. They did a bunch of tests to see if he had hurt his head. And when they were doing those tests, they uncovered that he had prostate cancer, and it had metastasized to his spine and his bladder and different parts of his body. So at that point, he went into hospice and passed away very shortly after that, a couple weeks. But during that short 5-week period, because of the hospital stay and all the prodding and testing and everything, he literally went from probably stage 1 to like stage 5. He went from being just his normal, kind, gentle self that was just repeating himself all the time to he was scared, and he didn't know what was going on, and he became very agitated, very violent. He didn't know who we were anymore. So that condensed, few weeks, like literally has me giving so much empathy to anybody that is dealing and caring or just knows someone or living with the disease themselves, because it is the same, but it's different for everybody. So everybody can give you their tips and tricks and tell you their story, but it's not the same for everyone. So that is kind of what spurred me to get involved with the association, because during all of that, I knew that the association was out there, but I never really knew how much they offered and all of the amazing resources that they have, which I wish I had known. They have a 24/7 helpline. They have tons of these type of presentations, and during COVID, they were all online, and so many resources, support groups, and just, you know, how to deal with someone with different behaviors, how to, things like this, how to communicate effectively. And after my dad passed I got involved with the walk. We created a team and got involved, and then I started hearing about some of the things that they offered, and I would get their emails. So I actually started dialing in to some of the courses that I didn't really need to be listening to anymore on how to communicate effectively or how to deal with different behaviors. And it almost became like a comfort because I was listening to people tell their stories, and it validated and made me think, you know what, like we did the best we could. Like everybody is going through something that's really, really difficult. So that was just really inspiring for me. And I thought, well, if I can just help educate people about the association and what they have to offer, and I can just help one person, then that would be a tribute to my dad, and something good would have come out of everything that we went through. So that's kind of my backstory and how I got here today. So today I'm going to take you through a presentation on communicating effectively. It's of a series. There's a bunch of different little sections, I guess you would call them, on different topics. And today we're going to talk about how to communicate with someone living with dementia, but also for the people that are either caring for people or know of people that are caring for people and want to be a support to them, how to communicate effectively with those people as well. So just by a show of hands, how many people here are either caring for someone or know someone that is impacted by the disease? Yeah. So hopefully, coming out of today, we are going to learn how dementia affects communication, because one of the things that was really had to keep reminding myself and my family, we would always be like, that's right, you have to almost remember that that they're sick, right? That they actually have a disease, or there's something physically going on with their brain. They're not just asking the same question over and over just because they want to, or they literally don't remember. I have friends now, as I get older, more and more of my friends will say, my in-law, you know, my mother-in-law has it now, or my father's showing signs or whatever, and they'll say, oh yeah, I was there Sunday, and you know, my mother-in-law literally asked me 20 times what I do for a living. And I'm like, I know, because she's sick, she doesn't know what she's asking. So it's a good way to just kind of get educated and help educate people around you. And then there's an approach with kind of like some tips and tricks called a person-centered approach on different ways to communicate. We'll go through that. We'll talk about the strategies on communicating well with a person that's living with dementia, and we'll help identify ways to improve communication with family, friends, and the medical community. So before we get started, what is communication? So it's basically how we tell people what we want and what we need. It's how we share what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what ideas we have, and most importantly, it's how we connect with other people. And that's probably one of the most difficult things, is trying to connect with somebody that is no longer fully comprehending what you're communicating to them. So if we did a quick little quiz, I guess by a show of hands, which of the following are ways that people communicate? Is it just talking and listening? Is it your attitude and your tone of voice? Is it your facial expressions and body language? Or do you think it's all of the above? All of the above, right? I had to laugh when I was going over this. I thought facial expressions. I feel like when I was a child, I would always get in trouble about, like, I didn't say it, but my face must have said it, you know? So yes, communication comes from our words, our attitudes, and definitely our tone of voice comes from our face and body movements and language, but it's just as important about listening, which is sometimes can be more important than talking. And so this is kind of what I was talking about before. So Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia cause actual damage to the brain cells. And the changes in the brain can affect memory, which was my dad's situation for a long time, thinking, problem solving, their behavior, and their ability to communicate. and these communication changes are caused by the disease and not necessarily the person. And usually, communication changes are often the early signs, which I always say, like, that was an example of, if hindsight is 20/20, understanding what's happening. Because there's little things that were happening with my dad that, like, we looked back, but when they were happening so slowly and so far apart, you wouldn't have said, like, oh, I think he has dementia. You know, like, it was just, oh, now that makes sense, the way that he acted that time, or why he didn't remember a certain thing or whatever. So sometimes they'll have difficulty finding the right word. Sometimes they'll just repeat themselves, different phrases and stories. They'll describe something when they can't think the word for it. So the example that I always use for this one is, my dad was a huge New York Yankee fan. And for people who aren't familiar, that team doesn't have the names on the back of their shirts, they just have the numbers. And so my dad would, you know, if somebody hit a home run, the guy was great. The next day he struck out, he was a bum. Like, he was constantly commenting. And then he started saying, like, that number 42 or whatever. And I'm like, Dad, that's, you know, so-and-so. And he's like, oh. And then he knew enough to compensate. Like, he would say, he doesn't deserve for me to remember his name, kind of thing. But now, looking back, I'm like, that was probably because he couldn't remember their names. But would I have said, oh, I think my father has dementia because he was doing that? Probably no, we didn't, you know. But then as the pieces all kind of come together, yeah, so sometimes they'll forget what they're talking about in the middle of a sentence. Sometimes the organization of the words, or like the order that they put their words in, are not always right. My father was born in Italy, and at the very end, when he really escalated to the final stage, he no longer spoke English, and that was a problem because we didn't speak Italian. So that brought his agitation to a whole other level, because we didn't know what he was saying, and he was getting really frustrated. So that was a little bit of a challenge. And then speaking less often. My dad was kind of quiet by nature, but again, when we look back, we're like, we thought it was his hearing. Like, my mom had sent him to get his hearing checked, and he needed hearing aids. So we were like, oh, maybe he just doesn't hear what's going on. But it probably was more that he didn't really understand the entire context of the conversation. And sometimes just using hand gestures or body movements more so than speaking could be a sign. So using a person-centered approach to communication means that you use what you know about the person and kind of adjust to them and communicate your style, or change your style of communication to their abilities and their preferences. And this can really help if you can kind of like meet them where they are, is what my father's neurologist used to always say. You know, if they're having a conversation that maybe doesn't make sense, you just kind of participate, and then they're still communicating, they're still having a conversation with you. And there's a couple of different pointers and stages on this. So use the knowledge of a person's likes, dislikes, and communication preferences. So sometimes it can be something that they did for a living, or something that a hobby that they used to like. My dad used to love to cook. He owned a deli. That was what he did for a living. And we would make dinner, and I would, and it was really like kind of cute. He would say, how do you know how to do all of this stuff? You know, who taught you how to do this? And I would say, you did, Dad. And he would say, I don't remember. But we would get started, and sure enough, it would all not all come back to him, but definitely what he would all of a sudden know how to slice the mozzarella cheese and take the sauce and put it on top of the pizza. And then we would sit down to eat dinner, and I would say, wow, this pizza's really good, Dad. He's like, why are you telling me? I'm like, well, because you made it. And literally from the 5 minutes that we made the pizza, the hour activity, he just, but at that moment, it was a way for us to communicate, and he was smiling and laughing, so it was a good thing to do. And then calling them by their preferred name. Sometimes nicknames like honey, sweetie, that can confuse them because they don't really identify with that anymore. And my dad always went by Tony. His name was Antonio, but he always went by Tony. But all of a sudden, when he got sick, he would always correct you. And even when I would say Dad at the end, because I don't think he really understood who we were necessarily, he would look at me like, Dad? He's like, I'm Antonio. I'm like, okay. So we would all call him Antonio from that point on. And then this was a big one, avoiding talking about the person as if they are not there. That is really, I would notice that with people that would come to visit, like maybe relatives that we hadn't seen in a while, or friends and family. It was almost like a little bit of an uncomfortableness because they didn't know how to act or what to do, or maybe what he was saying didn't make sense. So then they would just kind of act like he wasn't there. And he would pick up on that. He would say, like, I don't understand why everyone just looks at me. So they're maybe not able to participate in the conversation, but they're still picking up on the cues in the room at certain levels. Avoid correcting them, which again is not an easy thing to do. When I was reviewing my slides this morning, I'm like, I keep thinking in my head, nothing is easy. Like, it's hard, it's really hard. So none of these things are a magic bullet that are gonna make it, I don't even like to use the word to say make it easier, but make it less maybe stressful or less painful to see, or just engage them and get a smile out of somebody that's living with the disease. I think that all of these things kind of help you move in that direction. And then most importantly, validating their feelings, especially at the end. My dad kept asking, like, something bad is happening, like, what is going on? He knew there were, doctors and nurses coming in and out, and he was in the hospital for a little while. And so just kind of helping him understand that it was okay to be scared, and he understood that something was wrong and something was happening, I think helped on some level to make him feel a little bit safer and more secure. And then include them in the conversation. So kind of back to the same point, talking directly to them, speaking slowly and clearly, using a calm tone of voice, which, again, none of this is like always easy to do when you're in the midst of it, but just kind of taking a deep breath for yourself. And it helps you too, keeping, a calm voice, because you can get very stressed and very overwhelmed with everything. And then helping them engage in conversations that are meaningful to them. So we would take a lot of picture books out of like family events over the years, and we would talk about things that we had done in the past, and he would participate in those conversations. And then interestingly enough, because his memory was not perfect, but it was definitely stronger from the past than it was for the present. And he didn't talk a lot about like when he grew up in Italy or coming here. He didn't really always give a lot of detail. But then he would talk about literally like World War II, and when the he remembered vividly like the American soldiers coming and giving out Hershey bars to the kids in school, trying to ingratiate them when the war was kind of ending. So it was interesting to learn all that, and we videoed all of it, which is amazing to have now. But yeah, I was like, oh, I wish we had talked about that when he really knew what was going on. But yeah, finding things that are meaningful to them sometimes can spark more of a conversation than they've had in a while. And just talking about family and friends and things that we've done together, and the pictures really helped with that. That was like a huge, we went through the same photo books like 1,000 times, but they were new to him every time, which was good. And then giving them the time to decide what they want to say. It's, again, not easy, but avoid interrupting them or like finishing their sentence for them, or telling them what it is they should be saying, speaking for them, giving them choices sometimes, like, do you want to take a shower or a bath? Not just like telling them they have to take a shower, because sometimes they feel like they're not even participating or they have no say in what they're doing. And then sometimes the choices can be a little overwhelming. I remember I would say in the morning, Dad, do you want an egg for breakfast? Do you want a muffin? You want oatmeal? You want cereal? And he would just give me that look, and he would say, I don't know, whatever you think. And then it dawned on me, I don't think he knows what those things are. So then I would just give him two choices, and I would show him, a muffin and an egg, and then he would say, oh yeah, I'll have that. And then I was like, oh, that's what it is. He doesn't associate what the word is. And just really connecting in the moment and kind of appreciating those moments that they're there. Sometimes you have to look hard for them, but they're definitely there. And then limiting distractions. Maybe having a conversation in a room that's quiet, not a lot of distractions, getting rid of extra noise and visual. When there's too much going on, I think that it can be a little overwhelming, especially if they don't know what all of the things are that are happening. One-on-one conversations are good. We would play a lot of games, a lot of like children's games, Connect Four, the match where you have to find, the cards that match. So yeah, so that was, for a while that kept his attention, keeping the conversations just simple or whatever it was that he wanted to talk about, turning down the sound of the TV. So my mom is a big news watcher. She watches the news from 4 o'clock till like 7 o'clock. And I'm like, Mom, it's the same news every half hour. So at one point, my sister put her foot down. She's like, no more news. You get to watch the news once. Because at the end, he was so agitated and angry. And then you're watching, the Channel 4 news, and they're talking about all the stuff that's going on in the city or wherever. And I'm like, okay, we're nipping that one in the bud. So that was kind of a lesson learned. And we used a lot of music. Music was really, really soothing. And especially like older songs from when my dad was growing up. So that was another trick that we kind of used. And then obviously putting away your phone, which could apply to anything these days. And another way to just help is to use, back to the beginning when we talked about our different ways of communicating, using positive body language and facial expressions, hand gestures, like I used the example of the breakfast, kind of pointing to things and reminding him what those things are. Making eye contact, which was again one of the things when sometimes when people are uncomfortable, they just didn't feel comfortable looking my father in the eye, which is understandable, but at the same time a little frustrating. And then if they like physical contact, just like a touch of a hand or a hug or reassuring them that they're okay and that you love them, really I think makes a difference. And then sights and sounds and tastes. And tastes we used to do, like when we would do the cooking thing, we would make things that he had eaten 1,000 times, but he would say that he never did. So then we would say, like, oh, we're gonna have a taste test. I know you never had pasta, which is not true, but okay. So we have 2 really short videos here, just from the perspective of 2 caregivers that use different type of communication skills with their loved ones. So I'll just play those real quick.
Some of the changes I noticed in the middle stages with Mom would be she would start to point to things versus saying them. So for instance, she had a fascination for airplanes all her life. So we would be driving and she would just, when she would see one, she would point to the sky. In the early stages, she would say things like, oh, the last one for the night that we see, the last airplane. And the middle stages, it was more just pointing. And so when that would happen, I would say, oh, there's the last one for the night, Mom, right? So I would be that voice for her at that point. I knew what she meant. And so then I tried to supplement it with some words myself, and then maybe she would actually repeat it or say something in regards to that. So then I knew she was engaged in that conversation.
So a good example of using her body language or, helping her use other ways other than words.
When my husband was in the late stage of dementia, I would always sit and talk with him. I would try to use a calm tone of voice. I would always make eye contact, give him hugs, hold his hand. But sometimes it was hard for me to think of new things to tell him. I didn't know if my words were too complex. But one thing that we had always shared was a love of the Harry Potter books. And so I made sure that I always kept a Harry Potter book in his room. And sometimes a visit for us would be holding hands, and I would just read a chapter from a Harry Potter book. And that was actually really connective and important for us because as a couple, we had a lot of memories of reading those stories together. And I also was starting to read those stories with our son. So it felt like this way of making a family memory that I could hold on to and share with both my husband and our son.
I love that, because I love how it also became something that would stay with her and her son.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
The virtual audience, it said, unfortunately, I find that at some point I lose my patience and simply lack the ability to continue taking my loved one's verbal abuse. How can I then stay person-centered particularly when there's no one to take over in that moment.
Yeah, believe me, I understand. I understand, and again, when I was going through the slides and I kept thinking, none of this is easy, but it's just pointers. I would say we kind of, especially my mom would really have like a lot less patience with my dad, but she had also been living with it for a lot longer than we did. And at the end, my sister and I, again, he only lived for 5 weeks after he was diagnosed, but my sister and I kind of took over coming and staying with my mom and helping out. And my mom was really opposed to having somebody come in and help. She was just like, I don't want a stranger in my house, but we did. We could, we got somebody to come in, and then hospice was just amazing, amazing. And then when the first aide came in to help, I think we all were like, oh my gosh, this makes such a difference, even if it's for like an hour a day, that we could go out and just like take a walk or go for a coffee or just a change of scenery, because you really have to, I know everybody says it in any situation, you have to take care of yourself. It's like, the whole example they use on the plane where if you don't put the oxygen on, you're not going to be able to help anyone else on the flight. So I would say if there is a way to even just get a 1 hour break, a neighbor or a family member or somebody professional that you can have come in, that would be my recommendation. And I know it's not that easy sometimes to get that done, and also, I don't know what stage your family member is in, but hospice, I always thought like you couldn't get hospice involved until the very, very end. But we actually got hospice involved when we were looking into it before we even knew that my father had cancer. So he qualified just based on the Alzheimer's disease. So it's definitely something that I would encourage, looking for somebody to just give you a break for, even if it's an hour a week at first. You can go take a shower, you don't even have to leave the house. You can just go in another room, read a book, or have a cup of tea or something like that. Sometimes just a little bit of a break, but I do understand that it can be very challenging, very challenging. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Can I add something?
Sure, of course, yes,
It's okay to
please.
leave the room for a couple of minutes. If you're feeling that way, you can say, I need to go to the bathroom, I'll be right back.
Yeah.
And just go wash your face, take some deep breaths, smell something nice, just do something to get yourself in a different frame of mind.
Yeah.
And then walk back into the room, because
That's
very
perfect.
often at the moment you need something, there's no one.
Right, exactly. That's a good point, and that's an excellent, You're right. Any other questions? Okay, if you think of anything, please stop me along the way. So here is just kind of a little example that's followed by a little bit of a quiz, if you want to call it that. So Alonzo's wife, Alicia, is living with Alzheimer's disease and no longer able to get out of bed on her own. Prior to her diagnosis, she worked at an elementary school as a librarian. Alicia is no longer able to speak, and Alonzo is having a hard time communicating with her. This is making Alonzo feel less connected to Alicia. So what do we think Alonzo could do to try to communicate with Alicia in this situation? Hold her hand as he tells her what he did that day, put the radio on in her room, read her one of her favorite books, and there's nothing he can do because she can no longer speak. What would you think would be helpful here?
Like reading a book to her since she was a librarian.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then maybe holding her hand because of the whole touch thing. Make sure you check these off before it lets you go to the next page, which is... Right, so Alonzo should not put the radio on, kind of what we talked about before with the distractions in the room, and sometimes there's too much stimuli. There are still good ways for them to connect and to communicate. So this is, I kind of touched on it at the beginning. It's not always just about communicating with your loved one or the person that's living with the disease. It's also talking about your own feelings and needs and worries, which there are a lot of if you're one of the primary caretakers. And it's, again, not easy, but to be open and honest about how you're feeling, because your mental health and in some cases your physical health can be very impacted by the stress of caring for somebody. and having those difficult conversations when you need to. You know, sometimes it's about, is everything in place? Did they lay out a good plan? Do they have all their finances in shape? Do they know, you know, is there a will? Is there a directive for them? There are things that nobody wants to talk about, but they should be talked about, and it just makes it that much easier and less things to kind of have to navigate as you're getting deeper and deeper into the situation. And staying connected with others. I think it's somewhat of human nature sometimes to just kind of retreat or feel overwhelmed, example in that question, because sometimes you feel like nobody can understand this. Nobody understands. My mother used to say that all the time. You don't understand what I'm going through. And I'm like, I don't, because I'm not in Florida and I'm not there. But then when they moved up here, I had a full appreciation for how difficult it was to live 24/7 and care for somebody. So it was good that they were local, because now my mom had somebody to kind of talk to about it, and we were able to put the right resources in place and be a resource to her closer, not just a phone call or a plane ride away. So it's really important to have a support and to stay connected with that support. And communicating with others is the medical field, right, or the doctors. That's always a little bit overwhelming. It was again during COVID, so my first battle was always like bribing the nurse to let me go in with my father. She would say, one person, only one person in a lot of the offices, and I would be like, all right, well, good luck, because it's not gonna go very well, you know, like, and I used to say, he needs me, and trust me, the doctor's gonna want me in there, and most of them would be accommodating, but preparing for the appointments, like I would be relentless about taking notes when I was at home about his behavior and the different things he was doing, so that I would remember, because a lot of times when I was there, I was so nervous about, was he gonna get angry that he wanted to leave? Was he not gonna wanna be there? Was that gonna cause like a disruption in the appointment? So then sometimes at the beginning, like we wouldn't cover off what I needed to. So I used to just keep a journal, and I would just write down whatever popped in my head that I wanted to ask the doctor. Or sometimes they were, because of COVID, they would have a virtual appointment, or I could just send in like a long email, and then the doctor would like answer some of the questions, which was super helpful. And then I would take notes during the appointment, and also just like the environment. So perfect example, like making sure that it was like I was allowed in the office with them while they were talking about or examining him. And that it was quiet and somewhere that he could be as comfortable as he could. But that was, writing everything down was really key during everything. And that's kind of everything around the communication part of the module. There's like 2 slides about the resources that the association provides, but does anybody else have any questions or comments or something that didn't make sense or?
I have one question. You suggested direct eye contact. If you're dealing with someone who comes from a culture where eye contact is not okay, and maybe they've acclimatized to it here because that's how Americans are, but as they get sicker, they kind of revert to what they were raised with. Do you have any ideas about how you deal with that?
I would say it's kind of some of it is like you learn as you go, but if that's something you know about that person or their culture, then I would say it's okay to not do it. Do something that they're more comfortable with. Maybe it's, looking at a book together so you're not looking at them, or playing a game. Like we used to give my father towels from the linen closet. We would just dump them all on the couch and ask him I said, oh, I'm so busy at work and I need all these towels folded. Can you help me? And he would just sit there, so he was focused on that, so I wasn't necessarily having to look at him, but he felt like he was helping me. We would sort coins, and I always made it sound like I was so overwhelmed at work and that he was helping me with my work. So I think there's different ways that you don't necessarily have to, and I think sometimes, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I think sometimes, especially at the end when my dad didn't necessarily know, he knew us, but he didn't know like who we were anymore, our names or anything. I think it was like a little uncomfortable when we were looking at him, because we were like strangers to him at that point. So I think you can find other ways to fill that activity where it doesn't necessarily have to be, especially sometimes if agitated or they seem scared or something, then I think I would try to find some other activity that you're with them. Or music was like a great thing. Like, yeah, as soon as we put Frank Sinatra on, he would be tapping his foot, and it's amazing when it's something from the past or someone, maybe a singer that they liked or some type of music that they liked. I would try to find something else. So these aren't like, they're guidelines and they're recommendations, but they don't work for everybody. So many friends had given recommendations, and we would try things with my dad, and we had a situation where one day he woke up, it was towards the end, and he decided that somebody had come in the middle of the night and stole his white car, and he never had a white car in his whole life. And then to make it worse, we finally calmed him down that we called the police and we were gonna find the car. But then my brother came in the house and he thought my brother was the guy that stole the car. So, and which we laugh about now, like now that, we kind of smile and we tell these stories and we can have like a little bit of a chuckle, but it wasn't funny at the time. And he was convinced, and he just said, get him out, got really angry, and okay, we got my brother out of the house, and he wanted to know who that guy was and why we let him in the house. And I said, I never saw that guy before in my life, I don't know what you're talking about. And then doesn't he see a picture? My mother has a picture of my brother on the counter, so he's like, you lied to me, that's the guy who's, and I'm like, oh my God, you don't know what day it is, but you know that you saw that guy, you know what I mean? Like the things that they are capable of. And some of it's just on the fly, you just kind of have to go with it and meet them where they are, and just, yes.
There's another question from a virtual audience. Any suggestions as to how to deal with personal hygiene issues, for example, showering on a regular basis?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That's honestly what was gave my mother the okay to have the aide come in, which she was uncomfortable with because my father refused. He was obsessed with shaving, like at the beginning, he had to shave every day, like multiple times a day. He had his electric razor, you'd see him walking around the house, and then all of a sudden at the end, he decided he wasn't shaving and he was not taking a shower because he needed help, and I think he was probably a little modest and embarrassed. And so that was what my mother finally agreed to, and that was kind of like the thing that we really, really needed help with. Sometimes some of my friends had recommended making it a little bit of a game with some of their parents, like they would get their favorite dessert or their favorite food, or they could watch their favorite show on TV or something that maybe they were restricted at doing for whatever reason. But that sometimes only goes so far. So I would say it's a hard one to navigate because you're kind of trying to negotiate with them. But you do the best you can. So in some cases we were just using wipes, and he wouldn't brush his teeth anymore, it's battle, so we would use mouthwash, we tried to find different solves, candies and stuff like that. But yeah, there's only so much that you can try to convince them of, but having somebody that was professionally trained was super helpful, and she only came in once a week, but that was very helpful at the beginning. So as far as the association goes, there's information in the back there, so please help yourself to cards and all of the website addresses and phone numbers. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a 24/7 helpline, and they are master level trained clinicians that will help you. It's not a hotline. They literally will help talk you through a situation that you're in, give recommendations. Online, there's a ton of resources. There's you can go there and find out about if you're having safety issues, how to kind of not baby proof, but baby proof your home, how to have the conversation about them no longer driving. People can help talk you through that on the best way to handle that. There's also, I think it's in the navigator, you can kind of type in your situation and then someone will call you and kind of help guide you on maybe some of the resources that are out there or what the next steps could be. And then they have a ton of education programs. A lot of them are online, so I really encourage people to take part in those. They are anything from the 10 warning signs to healthy living, healthy brain, how to kind of maybe, if you know that maybe you are afraid that it runs in your family and you're at risk for it, how you can kind of do things now in your lifestyle to help hopefully mitigate that. And just a lot of information about drug trials that people can qualify for, and just the progress that they've made. There's 2 new drugs that are in the marketplace this year, so it feels slow, but it is happening. And you know, the most important thing that they always say is that survivor is out there. Like someday there will be a survivor of this disease based on all of the fundraising and research, amazing amounts of research that are going on. So it does, you know, sometimes it feels like you're in a tunnel with no light at the end, but there definitely is. Just in the 3 short years that I've been involved, the progress that I've seen is amazing. So I'm gonna pass this around. It's just a little sign-in sheet. And you don't have to put your personal information if you just feel comfortable putting your name and zip code. We just report back to the state of Connecticut, and then they kind of appropriate research funding based on the areas that people are showing up to learn more about the association. So I'll just pass this around. And then the only other little thing that I want to just talk about is the Alzheimer's walk. So there's some cards in the back with the dates and locations. They're all over the state of Connecticut, and the first one that I participated in was 2 years ago, and we, you know, made a team and we did a little fundraising, and it was at Calf Pasture Beach in Norwalk, and it was amazing. Like, I didn't think that I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. It's, first of all, a beautiful location. It's right on the water. Everything is purple, and there's a million vendors there and booths set up, and everybody's dressed in purple, and there's just this incredible energy, and you just look around and like everyone has a similar situation, yet different. But just the amount of money that they raise, and just everybody walks and everybody carries a flower, and the flower is a different color based on whether you're living with the disease, you're supporting someone with the disease, you're a caretaker, you lost someone to the disease, and then they have a white flower, which is for the first person that will ever survive the disease. So I really walked away from there thinking, wow, even if you don't make a team and raise money, like just to go and be around people that are going through the same thing or something similar. And it was just such a fun, like we were, you know, laughing and talking about my dad with a smile, as opposed to like, you know, a sadness and a, you know, regret for what he had gone through and that we lost him. So I highly encourage, just even if you want to just go for the day and not even do a team thing, just to get a taste of it, it's a really great thing to participate in. And there's a few of them in, you know, different parts of Connecticut, so hopefully something that's nearby and convenient to you.
It's great to be here with you today. Catherine, thank you so much for having me. This is such a wonderful segue, Liz, into what I'd like to talk with you about today, reading. Reading across the lifespan. It's not just something that we do for a period of time and let's say brain change sets in and we're no longer able to access the types of reading materials that we really enjoy and that kind of underpinned our days. So that's our daily newspaper, that has to do with the stack of materials that we're reading at our bedside, or any of the things that we do in the day-to-day. And oftentimes people get to the point where they are dispirited, they're frustrated, and the things that they enjoy, they can no longer enjoy anymore. Who here considers themselves to be or identifies as a reader? That's how I felt as well when I started this walk with my mother-in-law who was living with Lewy body dementia. Who here has a stack of books and magazines and newspapers and podcasts and possibly things on their Kindle that they're going to get to shortly? Okay, I brought mine just for reference. So that's true too, we're all readers. So what happened for me was I was an educator, and my job, I taught first grade in Massachusetts many years ago, and then later in Connecticut. And my job was to welcome new readers into the process under the whole language umbrella, but it taught me that reading, writing, and speaking were all part of the same whole, which is a beautiful thing as it applies to dementia, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So what happened to me was that in around 2017, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. She had been taking a number of falls at home, and things progressed pretty rapidly. Could no longer drive, was not safe, was banging up the car. We thought, we got off lucky, we're gonna make sure that she stays safe. So she went into assisted living, she was newly widowed, and that was going relatively well. a big sticking point that was causing her to be dispirited and really was robbing her of her joy was the fact that she loved to read the Boston Globe in the morning. And that was rolled up into plastic right where we left it, or the person that delivered left it. In the evening, she liked to read the Patriot Ledger. That was her local newspaper on the South Shore of Massachusetts. She'd read that. And then she also loved her large print fiction. She would take out the Mary Higgins Clark novels and things like that. She loved her library. She loved her library card. And she also liked to play penny bridge with her friends. And she was kind of being othered from that group, sadly, because she could no longer, they'd bring a brown bag lunch and things like that, and she could no longer keep track of that, and it wasn't going well. So she was becoming increasingly lonely, increasingly despondent, and it was a difficult situation. As COVID progressed in 2020, she ended up moving upstairs to a memory care unit. And things accelerated because the things that she was enjoying, going out to lunch or taking a little excursion locally, we could take her to the beach, we could take her for an ice cream cone, we could take her to get her nails done or to get a haircut. Those things weren't happening anymore. So things were accelerating very quickly, and I could see that the despondence and the sadness, a lot of it was because she loved to read and loved to be exposed to those things. So I recall one day I stood in the doorway of the day room and everyone was inside watching her. Everybody loved Raymond. And everyone was on the sofa and on chairs and everybody seemed relatively happy, except for her. So she saw me and everybody called her Nana, hence the name of the series, Nana's Books. So Nana came over when she saw me and we started to chat, and on the way out of the room she said, "Well, you know, Lori, not everybody loves Raymond." I thought, you know what? You're right. I don't know if I would want to be parked in front of everybody loves Raymond every day and things like that. So she kind of went down the hall in a huff, and that was kind of our default means of communicating, because I had moved away 30 years prior. I'd married her youngest son and absconded for Connecticut. And I never really got to know her in that time when we were living apart and I was raising my children who are now grown. So what happened was that I really feel like over the months and the short years that she was living with dementia and memory care, I really formed a relationship with her and a bond with her. My daughter Ingrid in particular did. And a lot of it had to do with, we would kind of try to show her things on the cell phone. And everything was too small, but the kids would say, "Oh, Grandma, this is my Nana, this is my baseball game, or this is me riding my horse, or taking a horseback riding lesson, or doing these things," and she couldn't really see very well. So I put my teacher hat on out of just necessity. So I went home and thought, what's something that she really likes? So I put together a manila folder, and I was so proud, of art and some poetry and some things that she liked. And she really did like that very much. And it actually ended up becoming this book. Anybody recall the Bombay Company? And it was like, you could get paintings in the mall, and you could get like little pieces of mahogany furniture or little fancy things to go on your dresser. So she grew up very poor in South Boston. And when she really felt like she made it in the world, she loved to get a few things at the Bombay Company. So she loved art, and I knew that, and she had a few things around the house from the Bombay Company. So I thought, maybe I could approximate some of the artwork, and then put it with some seasonal and resonant poetry, things that she'd, this is Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, but things that resonate with her and things that she would like. A Mile with Me. And I wanted to incorporate as many things as I could and make it as adaptive as possible, visually and so forth for her. This was not a book quite yet, it was just a manila envelope. So we got to talking one day, and we came upon a conversation about South Boston, her neighborhood. And we got into this really deep conversation about her friend Pinky, who went around the neighborhood and stole everyone else's boyfriend. And she really was about it. She really got animated about this conversation, so I thought, here we go, this is a place of entry, this is an invitation that I can give her. So I started to put together some images of Ireland and of just Irish wit and wisdom. So it ended up becoming this book, and we would just laugh and laugh and laugh. And sometimes I thought to myself, these were all just loose at that time, characters better than wealth. So there were some minimal text books like this. She mightn't be much good to boil a pot of spuds, but she'd look lovely carrying them to the table. And that's actually Oscar Wilde's wife. Yeah, so there's just a lot of really deep points of reference. When you're not fishing, be mending the nets. So just like little quips and wisdom and proverbs and things like that. So I thought, wow, this is really happening. So people in where she was living, she was in Sunrise, people would come around and say, you have anything for veterans? My mom really loved her cats. Do you have anything to do for a kitten lover? Or do you have anything to do with Judaica? Or do you have anything to do with babies? My mother loves babies. Do you have anything, for veterans? And my father loved poetry too. My father loved victory gardening and all that stuff. So little by little, I started to put this series together because I really thought, wow, what really speaks to people is when the work is identity-based. So if it had to do with your vocation or your avocation or your past, it really helped guide you into a conversation with these visual cues. So sometimes, and then the auditory cues with us speaking. So sometimes an image would just spark a conversation. Let's say it was about this little crocheted dress, or it was about a child's baptism, or it was something that she recalled. Very, very non-threatening because no one was asking any questions of her. It was not an interrogation of any kind. You could make declarative statements. It could be, it's usually about favorite things. So these were, let's say, my favorite things. Might have to do with raising a family or doing things like that. So you could use the visual and the auditory cues to start a conversation. What happened was I started to realize that we'd only get about halfway through the books, and then we put the books aside, because at that point we'd be so deep in the conversation, and I thought, oh, I wonder if I failed. And then I thought, absolutely not, because the book had achieved its goal, and that was to ramp us into a really authentic, deep, meaningful conversation. So these books are meant to, and these other great resources are meant to ramp people into a conversation with adaptive texts that they can engage with. So this is a typical broadsheet newspaper. This one, the Recent Register, based in Pittsburgh, from Luke Gilligan's newspaper. It's so that people can have that kinesthetic. They can open the newspaper like their morning paper. They can have that tactile, that feel. They have all the experience of reading the newspaper, but yet it's something that they can find success with. And they don't feel compromised in any way. They feel that it's part of that ritual. It's part of your identity, right? It's part of who you were and what you enjoyed and who you still are. And then next, I've got a friend of mine out in Portland, Oregon, Nikki Jardin, has Mirror Magazine. Again, just beautiful, beautiful arts and culture and activities and just so many things that you can do and that you can share together and sit side by side. So the goal is, and I guess the gold standard is the dyad. It's me and you, it's the two of us together, and we can have that exchange. But it doesn't have to just be me and you. It can be me and my granddaughter, or it can be me and my husband, or it can be a clinician, let's say a speech and language pathologist, or a CNA, or somebody that, or a personal care aide. Somebody that can come in and read these types of materials with your person. Now people say, my mom has dementia, she can't read anymore anyway. Absolutely not the case. In most cases, people can read into stage 7, and to just really, really, people say the stages. Tipa Snow says, which I really like, that it's not about stages. It's about states, GEMS states. So you're at different states at different times of day. You might notice that your loved one is very clear in the morning and has lots of cognition and is high-spirited and things are going very well. You might notice late day that your loved one is kind of more confused and is having, is expressing themselves behaviorally, and they say agitation. I don't like to say agitation because I just feel like it's an unmet need. So it's just expressing an unmet need, but that they're frustrated and it's aggravating and they're feeling the things that we're feeling. So those are the different things that you recognize in the different GEM states. But again, people say, I took my husband to the doctor and he's having so much trouble at home and he doesn't express himself, and he's having all kinds of issues. We went to the doctor, and he was like Nietzsche. I can't explain it. They call that sometimes show timing, which really just means the person can pull themselves together cognitively for that short period of time, and they're able to, we've all got our pride, we've all got our, we want to feel like we always have, so people really do, exert themselves to present themselves in a certain way when they're in a certain setting, possibly in a restaurant, possibly when a visitor comes by. But we know as the care partner that eventually that falls apart, and they later in the day might have even, let's say, a harder time because the expressions are more difficult, and the person is, let's say, slipping into like the late day, sundown and that time of day, and they're having a little bit of a harder time. So these books I would recommend, or any of these magazines, the newspapers, audio books, the books are voice enabled. It's just a good time of day, sundown, and we used to just listen. Sit and relax and listen together. And it doesn't, if you want to go and put dinner on, you can put on some of the audio versions and listen to the poetry and listen to the song and listen to the verse. So I'm finding that the experiences for people are really greatly enhanced when A, we know that people can engage with them. B, they can find success. C, it's identity-based, something that they love and that they enjoy. And lastly, it's something that they feel strongly, that it puts them in a place of strength, and it puts them in a place of their wisdom, so they're able to partake in a way that they feel good about. So essentially, that was kind of how the books came to be, and how the magazines, I know that Nikki Jordan started, she was in Portland taking care of an aunt with young onset Alzheimer's. And she'd go visit with her, and she loved her magazines, and to page through the magazines, it was almost like a ritual for her in the late afternoons. So Nikki came up, and her partner in her business, Tave Fache, they came up with Mirador. Luke at Gilligan at the Resense Register came up with this because he grew up, his mom's a social worker, clinical social worker, and he grew up in long-term care settings. So post-acute care, long-term care. So that's how these came to be. Again, another huge thing, because people say, well, why do you have so many books in the collection? People want the autonomy. They want to be able to self-select something for themselves once again. So these are kind of like the Goldilocks of adaptive publications, in that it's not what you were reading before necessarily. The content is very similar. Your intellect remains intact. It's not a board book or repurposed children's book or something that's going to infantilize or make people feel less than. It's right in the middle. It's adult content, and it's resonant themes, and it's familiar art and literature and topics, art, culture, so forth, but it's done in adaptive formats. So I'm going to take a breath on the adaptive formats part. What does that mean? To make an adaptive book, magazine, or newspaper, there is a guide called the Deep Guide, D-E-E-P. It's based in the United Kingdom, and they take regular texts of any kind, let's say wayfinding, signs in a restaurant, or menus, or any of those kinds of things, and the Deep Guide talks about, it's very scientific, the width of the margin on the perimeter, the fonts, hyperlegible fonts, the spaces between letters, the spaces between words, the spaces between lines, the amount of text on a page. Is it overwhelming? Is it something someone's just going to put down? How the book works, is everything going to be contained on that one page, because you can't continue on to the next page, because that creates confusion for people. So this is a full text book, and as you can see the width of the white space on the perimeter? Mm-hmm. This is a hyperlegible font. This is an 18-point font. Large print is considered to be 16-point font. And as you can see, the layout is consistent. Every single book has the same layout, so it's predictable. The covers, although they're different, the way the covers are laid out is very scientific, in that if you're having problems with visual acuity, you can recognize, aha, this one must have to do with veterans, or this one must have to do with Catholicism, or this one must have to do with the LGBT community, or this must have to do with, let's say, flowers, or Easter, or indigenous communities. So at a glance, people that are having cognitive challenges are better able to see, oh, that's the book I like. And they feel successful in that way. Because sometimes it's hard to get started when you are, you're kind of looking through things and you don't know which is for you and you don't know if it's something that, you can partake in right now necessarily. So again, these are made to have a non-clinical feel, and the appearance is very organic. Same with the newspapers and the magazines. They look just like a regular newspaper because they are regular newspapers. So that's something that's very, very life-giving and very affirming. So a lot of the books and the magazines and the newspapers have to do with affirmation. So we're affirming the lived experience of the individual. People say, well, why is that so important? Older adults, particularly older adults, are in life review. And that just simply means that you're thinking about your life, who you were, who you still are, the experiences that you had. And so a lot of times these types of things are cues. They're visual cues to your faith tradition or your past or your family, let's say, the connotations that revolve around the different holidays. They're thematic, they're seasonal. So those are very, very helpful things for people that are experiencing brain change, is that visual reference. And then again, anything about these publications, they're adaptive and they're meant to assist the person, but in a very dignified way. So they can kind of partake in these individually or independently initially, let's say in the early stages. In middle stages, possibly do a picture walk, possibly do it with an assist. In the backs of all the books, there are conversation guides for every single book, and the same thing with the magazines. Where's the conversation guide here? Here we go. And it's let's find, or it's fun facts, or I do an author share in every book. So I ask nothing of the individual because it's something that they can partake in, but they don't have to have any kind of recall, because when you're having problems with expressive language and with word finding, that can be daunting. Or sometimes when they do a read aloud and everyone sits in a circle and they're all reading. Remember how intimidating that was when you were in elementary school? I know as a teacher, I remember when I was a youngster because it was challenging. So everything is done to support the reader and to support people to read across the lifespan to the extent that they are able, and it's very habilitative, not just cognitively, but socially, emotionally, spiritually. That's kind of the gist of these 3 publications. Does anybody have any questions before I go?
I just want to say that as a social worker, I'm a social worker. Hi, ladies. I just want to say that when I think about your books and the fact when you look at family members and caregivers, so much of what you've provided at the end is really a resource. Because if you're the person struggling with taking care of that person and you want to have a meaningful interaction less, and some people are just not creative, and the stress of it all just becomes like another thing I have to do. Well, you have it in you, so you could be creative. But if you don't, then that information at the back is right there available and can set you on your way, so it doesn't become a frustrating task for the person trying to have the dialogue.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to
Yeah,
think
beautiful.
about it, you just go to the back and it
Yeah,
helps
really
you.
nice.
Yeah.
That's the idea. And I
That's
think in
awesome.
the UK they have, it's called social prescribing, and it's coming to the US. What it means is that when you get a dementia diagnosis in the UK, you get 14 one-hour visits once a week for 14 weeks, and you get a link worker that comes, and it can be anybody. It can be a community member who, let's say, was a teacher or was a Sunday school teacher, or is a retired nurse, or is a pipe fitter. It could be anybody that is in your community. And what they do is they come and they sit with you for that hour. It may have to do with just sorting making sure there are no fall or trip hazards in the house, and it may be just taking a visual sweep of how you're doing, living on your own still. But part of it also has to do with that social interaction, and it's so engaging, and it keeps people cognitively debilitated. It keeps them cognitively on point, and they are having that exchange with people, and it keeps you alive. That human need, as Liz was saying before, we were talking about people need people. And that's something that's so critical to human flourishing is the fact that we have these types of connected visits. So yes, that's a really big part of the backs of the books. I'm gonna find my glasses because so that is a full text book, and then these are wordless picture books, and people can use these visual references so that they can come up with, as you were saying, conversation, and they can juxtapose these two images or kind of make declarative statements, and you know, their expressions are different, their realities are different, their socioeconomics, the time in history, the different dolls, and a lot of people really remark heavily on the shoes, the children's shoes. So that's something that, again, you could leave this with your mom or your grandmother or your, you know, anybody that you love, or let's say a patient of yours, and they can just sit for hours and think about the things that bring them back in their own lives. So it's a nice, soothing, great way to self-regulate is to look through books like these on your own, and just the modality, just the paging through books is something that's so restorative for people. So this is a wordless picture book. And then I've also got books that are, this is haiku, and it's a lot of nature. So if there's somebody that was a nature lover that loved to take hikes or be out in the world, if you're in a locked unit, you're never going to forest bathe again. You are not going to walk the halls of a museum again. So the idea is to bring these visual references into people. And these are minimal text books. So they're hyper-legible, large fonts. This is about a 22-point font. And again, the format goes through all the seasons. So people can talk about, like, this is September now, I love this. In September, the sky wears a lined kimono. I think we're all taking our lined kimonos out pretty soon, right? I know I am. So this is something that someone can look at, and it's simplified in its way, but it's very, very deep in another way. Who knows that in the depth of the ravine, of the mountains of my hidden heart, a firefly of my love is aflame. So you're in there, the spirit is within, and I think that people like to have these reminders and these references, and everything is very carefully chosen to have these types of that deep meaning that you can either see. It's kind of like Pixar and a Disney movie where the parents are crying because the man, you know, he passes away, or the wife passes away, and he builds his the balloons and he lifts the house and does the whole thing. But the kids are just seeing, oh, that boy's a Cub Scout and he comes to visit the man, and all the different happenings. There's those two levels of interaction. So if you're reading this with your child or your grandchild, they may be like, oh, fireflies. But if it's you yourself and you're, let's say, the elder, you might be thinking about the light that's still within me, and on a deeper level. So again, I like to liken it to the Disney Pixar type of a thing where there's that one level which has got that little joke or that little humorous point or that little sweetness, but there is a deeper meaning a lot of times. And then some of it is just truly deeply spiritual. And let's say somebody wants to get up and do their rosary in the morning, they're familiar with that. They've got all the real standards like the Apostles' Creed, things like that. So again, if you go, these ladies before we're looking at the books of Judaica, and again, points about Shabbat and about the Talmud and wisdom and things that you'd see in the Torah. So just little bits of wisdom, little bits of virtue and joy, and all of the lovely things that surround us so that we can help one another extract that joy and share those moments.